Today we're going to be learning Pesachim Daf Pedalid. Today is the Daf for Shabbat. We are going to start now at the top of the page at the Mishnah. The first discussion that we're going to have today has to do with the meat of the Korban Pesach. What is considered meat? All the people around the Korban Pesach have to eat a kezayit of meat. The question is, what's meat? Now, the issue here becomes that if you remember, the animal used for the Korban Pesach is generally a young animal. It could even be, as long as it's 8 days old, it can already be used up until a year, which means that there's a lot of soft parts of the animal that are edible at that point. But they're parts that are eventually going to get hard in the animal. So the question is, and they won't be edible. So the question is, can those be eaten or not? So that's what the Mishnah is going to discuss. If it's a part of the body that can be eaten in the Shor HaGadol, in a big bull, then it can be eaten in a young goat. And also the sinews. It's a bit unclear exactly what this is. That's in some people say by the ribs or by the shoulders. And the cartilage, okay, those can be eaten. So the Gemara is going to ask, Rabbi says there's a contradiction. Tnan, no, but it sounds like things that can't be eaten, not. But then it says in the end, the second part of the Mishnah says all those parts, these aren't parts that you can eat in a full-grown bull. So what do they answer? Right? The Mishnah seems to have two parts that contradict each other. So the Mishnah answers, Ela Tanaihi. Really, it's a machloket between two different Tanaim. V'hachi katani, and this is how you should read the Mishnah. Kol hane'echal b'shor gadol yachel b'gdi arach, v'she'eno ne'echal lo. But if it's not eaten, you can't. V'yesh omrim, but some people say af rashei knafayim v'aschusim. Some people say even those parts can be eaten in the. Okay, so there's two different opinions brought here, and that shows the Mishnah, even though it looks simply like it's one, it's really two different opinions. Rava has a different explanation. Rava amar mahin katani, v'hachi katani. What mahin means, the second part of the Mishnah is coming to explain the first part of the Mishnah. It says, kol hane'echal b'shor gadol b'shalka ye'echel b'gdi arach b'tzli. Anything that can be eaten in a shor gadol, if you cook it, if you remember, we've seen shlakot, it's things that are cooked for a very long time. If you cook them long enough, they'll soften. If that's the case, then you can roast them in a gdi arach, even though you're not really planning to, cook them for a long time. But since in a shor gadol they could potentially be cooked, therefore you can now. Umahen, and what are these parts? Rashei knafayim v'aschusim. Okay, these are the parts that one can eat. The rashei knafayim and the schusim, those are parts that could be theoretically cooked for a long time in a shor gadol, and then they could be eaten. Tanya kabatei de Rava. There's a brighter to support Rava. Kol hane'echal b'shor gadol b'shalka yachel b'gdi arach b'tzli. Anything that can be eaten in a shor gadol cooked for a long time can be eaten in the gdi arach, roasted. So again, this is a brighter that just supports what Rabbi just said. Umahin, and what are these parts? Rashei knafayim v'aschusim, b'gidin harakim nidonin kebasar. And the sinews, the soft sinews, are treated also like meat because again, they can be cooked for a long time in a big bull, and they can be eaten. Okay. Itma. Now we're going to have a machloket. Gidin shesafal nahakshot. What if we have sinews that ultimately are going to harden? Rabbi Yochanan amar nimnim alehem bepesach. Rish Lakish amar ein nimnim alehem bepesach. So Rabbi Yochanan says you can join a group if that's the amount of kazayit you get are the sinews. And Rish Lakish says no, you can't. So Rabbi Yochanan amar nimnin alehen. Why? Batar hashta azlinan. He goes by now. Since now they're soft, you can therefore eat them. We don't care. It's eventually they're going to harden and be inedible. Rish Lakish amar einim nim alehem batar basof azlinan. Rish Lakish says we go by what eventually is going to happen. But this is a classic thing. How do we look at items? Do we look at them as where they are now, or do we look at them as where they'll be in the future? Right. The famous brings to mind is about Yishmael when they kick him out, and then it says he was saved by Asher Husham, as opposed to looking in the future what was going to be with him. Right. He was saved for who he was at that point in life, and we weren't worried about what his future was going to hold. So now, Eitive Rish Lakish, the Rabbi Yochanan, he brings a contradiction. He says, remember, Rabbi Yochanan said, Nimnim alehem, right? Because Batar Hashas didn't we go by right now. So he says, take our Mishnah. Our Mishnah seems to contradict exactly what you're saying. Which sounds like Hani'in, Aval Gidin Shesafan La'akshot Lo. Didn't say they're sinews that are eventually going to harden. It said only the Schusim and the Rashi Knafayim. But these parts, no. So Amalei, Tane Hane V'Wadin Lahanach. So Rabbi Yochanan says, oh, well, it says those, but it means also the sinews that are going to harden ultimately. Hane, now what's the reason? Hane, my time, the reason why those are permitted is because you can cook them for a long time and they'll soften. And so are these sinews. They can also be cooked for a long time and they can be edible. But Amarle Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Abin. Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabbi Abin the following: when you get to Rabbi Avau, ask him the following question, contradiction. Did Rabbi Yochanan really say that sinews that ultimately are going to harden, you can eat them on Pesach, you can join a korban Pesach, assuming that's going to be your kazayit? Alma batar hashta azlina. That sounds like we go by what they are right now. But in a different case, Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan the following question. Not about korban Pesach, but about, is something considered edible? For what purposes? For the purposes of being tameh. We've learned before that impurities have to be, if you have impurity of food, has to be considered food in order for it to become impure. So, or harosh shel egel harach, okay, the skin on the head of a young calf, ma'u sheyi tameh. Can it become tameh? Va'amarlo. So Rish Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan, what did Rabbi Yochanan say? Ein mitameh. It's not, doesn't become tameh, it's not food. Now, at this point, it's soft. It's going to later harden. So what do you see here? Alma batar basafas, and he must follow what's going to ultimately happen and not the way it is right now. Amarle, derama lacha. Okay, he has a very strong response to him. Okay, in other words, what happened? Rabbi Yirmiyah went to Rabbi Avin and said, when you get to Rabbi Avau, ask him the following question. So Rabbi Avin says back to Rabbi Yirmiyah, very insultingly, he says, derame lacha lo chash lekimche. The one who questioned this, meaning you, he's not concerned about his flour. Okay, what are we talking about? Flour, Flour, right? Food flour. What's the idea here? So there's different ways of explaining it. One way is explaining it is that when you grind your flour, there's the wheat and the chaff. And generally you separate the chaff and you don't grind it up in your flour. It will taste disgusting. But he said, or it will make it, I mean, the truth is it's more like a whole wheat kind of flour, but that was always considered a bad thing. So now he says, you obviously aren't very concerned about things. You're not very, and they say in Hebrew, bararani, you're not discerning of different things. And you didn't really learn your Torah very well. Okay. However, you define this phrase, it means you don't know what you're talking about. He changed his mind. Okay, so Rashi helps out a little bit with what's going on, because this is a sugya from Chulin. And he says, Rabbi Yochanan there had responded to Rish Lakish from a Mishnah. And then he realized that the Mishnah, that he says, Amalei Rabbi Yochanan, Al takniteni b'ota Mishnah sheb'lashon yachid ani shoneh oto. In other words, in the end, he said, I think that Mishnah is only one person's opinion, and therefore he ends up ultimately changing his mind. And he basically ends up saying that what he says, he really in the end says that we're going to go by the end and not the beginning. Okay, so in that case, one second, let me just make sure I have it clear. Right, so in the end, Amar Lo, right, Rabbi Yochanan said to him, right, right, so batar basafas linan, and then he said, we don't paskin that way, that the or harosh, okay, there's a Mishnah that says or harosh is mekabel tumat ochlin, which originally Rabbi Yochanan held by because he thought that since it was soft, it was going to be matame tumat ochlin. And then in the end, he changed his mind and he said, no, now I realize I made a mistake. That Mishnah was only an individual's opinion, and I actually agree with you. And therefore, he changes also what he says by us in terms of we're going to go by what it ultimately will become and not by what it is right now. Okay, new Mishnah, a new topic. we're now going to talk about the topic of not breaking bones of the Korban Pesach. It's a fascinating topic for one major reason, which is it's the source of the Sefer HaChinuch for a very famous line in the Sefer HaChinuch, and I'll read it to you. The question is, why can't you break a bone in the Korban Pesach? So the Sefer HaChinuch says, the reason is, she'ein kavod lebnei malachim v'yotzei aretz ligro atzamot u'lishavram keklavim. It's like an act of dogs, important people. How are we supposed to feel at the Seder? Like we're important, free people. That's not the way free people behave. The only people who do that are starving people who don't have food. They break the bones to get everything out of it. That's not the way that respectable, wealthier people eat. And on Pesach night, we're supposed to feel like, and this is for those learning in the Shiur of Arvei Pesachim, of the skills class. So there we've been talking about, right, the idea of feeling like a free person, feeling like, and there's a whole emphasis on the poor people, that we have to treat them like everybody else. They have to be like wealthy people at the night of the Seder, or, this feeling of free. We have to provide them with wine and everything that they need. So this is another thing that, according to him, we want to feel like free people, and we want to treat it like kings and not like slaves, as the Jews were. Interesting, this comparison between wealthy and poor people as slaves and free people. One can argue against that, but let's leave that aside right now. So now, why is it so famous? Because he describes, right, he says it's like eating like a dog. And then eventually he describes the very famous line where he says, that basically, if we act in a certain way, it will cause us to be a certain way, and that we have to watch how we act so that we don't, right, or we don't end up having certain behaviors that we don't want, and that we have to, if we act a certain way, we'll feel a certain way, we'll be a certain way, and that's a very famous line. Even if you don't really understand, even if you don't really feel it, but if you do it, it will come. The Rambam has a different approach. In Moreh Nevuchim, he says in the third section in the chapter 46, he says. In the Sefer HaChinuch, by the way, if you want to look it up, it's the 16th mitzvah, Tet Zayin. So the Rambam says, the whole din of matzah, he says, is matzah, we know, you eat it, you're supposed to, when they got out of Egypt, they ate the matzah very quickly the first year. And he says, they didn't have time, right? They rush out, they didn't have time to make their food, and that's why they ate matzah. So he says it's the same thing with the breaking the bones. They didn't have time to break the bones and take out all the marrow inside because they were rushing. And we're supposed to rush, right? We're supposed to eat in a way that we don't stop to start breaking the bones, to remember how they got out of Egypt. So it's a very different reason, very different understanding, right? One is to feel like they did in terms of being free men, and one is to feel like they did, meaning do the actions that they did. And even though that was the year they got out of Egypt, we're supposed to also eat quickly for that reason. So it's an interesting distinction. And by the way, it matches the Rambam's version in the Haggadah. He says, I will just read this. The Nusach Haggadah that they had in the Galut was Matchil al Kos Sheni va'Omer. They would say after you pour the second cup, they say Bebechilu Yatzanu Mitzrayim, and this is the bread at Halach Ma'anya. So we start with Halach Ma'anya, or at least the Ashkenazi Haggadah, but other people have the version of the Haggadah that says Bebechilu Yatzanu Mitzrayim, which is they rushed, right, in a hurry. They came out of Egypt. I didn't do a check, but I think it could be that there are nuschaot of the Haggadah that follow the Rambam's version. And it says, Bebehilu, we rushed out of Egypt. And it's, again, part of recounting this issue of rushing. He has a focus on that element. Okay, with that, we'll get started with the Mishnah. You get lashes for doing this. But if you leave over, this is a totally different topic. You don't eat your meat in time, then you don't get lashes for that, even though it's forbidden. You have to burn it. You don't get lashes. We'll see why in a minute. And if you break bones of a impure korban pesach, then you also, okay, lo etzem lo tishbru is only if it's a kosher korban, meaning it was not disqualified. But if it was disqualified, then no. Okay, if it became impure, then no, you don't get lashes. So the Gemara starts off, Bishlama motio b'tahol. I understand if it's left over, then why don't you get lashes? Ditanya. We've learned this before. Lo totiru mimenu ad boker. Don't leave over till the morning. Vanotar mimenu ad boker v'gomer. And whatever's left in the morning, then ba'esh yisaref, it says. It should be burnt. Why do they say it like this? What do you see? There's a mitzvah ase and a mitzvah lo taseh. There's a don't leave it over. And if you do, then you're commanded to burn it. This is what we call a lav hanitak la'aseh. There's a negative, and then there's how do you fix it? Once you have a solution for how to fix it, you don't get lashes anymore, right? Some people explain, we've talked about this, it's because that's your punishment. Your punishment is to fix it, right? Punishment is usually to cause you to repent, right? To fix the problem. So, lomar lacha she'eno lokeh, okay? And that's the reason to tell you don't get lashes. That's divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yaakov has a different reason. And where Lomin Hashem, who said that's not the reason. And some people say it's not the reason because it's not a lavani taklase, or a lavani taklase does get lashes, even though that really goes against the common reason. Or there's a more pressing reason. In other words, you could say that, but you could say something even more so, which is it's because there's no action associated with this. You didn't do anything. You just didn't eat it, but you didn't do anything. You didn't actually do an action. So because you just didn't do something. And we know that a lav she'en bo ma'aseh, according to most opinions, ein lokin alav. But ela shover b'tamei minal. And how do we know that if you break a bone, and this is going to be the topic for the rest of today's stuff, if you break a bone on an impure sacrifice, how do we know that you don't get lashes? We saw this drasha before. This came up before when we wanted to say etzem lo tishberu bo was coming to exclude the chagiga, right? Is the chagiga. Do we have a problem with etzem lo tishberu bo in the korban chagiga or not? So we had a whole thing, bo, and not in the korban chagiga. But some people said, no, bo is to exclude the pasul. And here we have that drasha. Bo b'kasher v'lo b'pasul. So it's only in a kosher one and not in one that's disqualified. Tanu Rabbanan, there's another braita. Etzem lo tishberu bo b'kasher v'lo b'pasul. Okay, that's the same thing, but now we're going to see a different opinion. Rebbe Yomi, it's going to be the same opinion, but a different pasuk. He's going to learn it from a different part of the verse. B'bayit achad ye'achel ve'etzem lo tishberu bo. It says you should eat it in one house and don't break the bone. What does he say? We're going to connect these two parts. If you can eat it, then it's forbidden to break the bone. But if it's not able to be broken, able to be eaten, then you don't have, it's not forbidden to break the bone. So now we're going to get into my beinayu. And if you have the sheet, you can see there's a big chart. And there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8. 8 different answers to what is the difference between them. And that's going to basically be most of our daf. So what's the difference between these two? So again, we have bo, b'kasher v'lo b'pasul. And then we have the second, which is Rebbe, who says it all depends on whether you can eat it or can't eat it. Okay? If it can't be eaten, then you don't have etzem lo tishberu bo. So Amar Rabbi Yomi, Pesach haba betuma ika beinayu. Oh, our classic example we've been learning about, a Pesach that you brought betuma. Why is that? Leman da'amal kasher hai pasul. It's actually pasul. It's not, okay, it's a pseudo pasul because we say tuma dechuya, which means that in the end, this is a sacrifice that was brought betuma. So even though it's allowed to be brought betuma, it's still problematic. And therefore, you wouldn't be obligated in etzem lo tishberu bo. So leman da'amar ro'eh la'achila. But this, hainami ro'eh la'achila, but you're allowed to eat this. So therefore, it is part of etzem lo tishberu bo. Okay, this is going to be the only opinion that's going to actually come out that Rebbe is going to be more, or I should say the Tanakama is going to be more strict. Because then the Gemara is going to say Rav Yosef Amar each time, and you can see it in the chart. We're going to have what would Tanakama say, what would Rebbe say. Now we're going to say Tanakama said it's pasul, and Rebbe would say it's kasher. Rebbe would say you can, in other words, again, this is good enough that you can be obligated in etzem lo tishberu bo. All the others are going to be the reverse, and that's based on Rav Yosef's question. And each time we're going to reject this ika beinayu, and whoever rejects it's going to come up with a different explanation. Rav Yosef Amar, ki agavna de kule alma ein bo mishum shvirat ha'etzem. If it's really brought betuma, everyone will agree there's no shvirat etzem. Okay, on the year that you bring it betuma, there's no problem. Why? To Rebbe la kule ka'ate, v'hai ha pasulhu. Rebbe is only going to be more lenient. We're assuming that when Rebbe adds v'bayit achad yachel and all that, he says kol ha'ro'oi la'echol yesh bo mishum shvirat etzem v'she'ein ro'oi la'echol ein bo. He's coming to add on that we're going to be even more lenient with this law. Okay, there's an assumption. For whatever reason, they assume that Rebbe is being more lenient. And therefore, we're going to say, Ela haitalo shata kosher v'nifsal ika benayu. It must be a case where it could have been eaten. Okay, it was good at a certain point and then became disqualified. What's the case? So let's see. Lamanda amal kasher hakasherhu. Okay, so they don't describe the case actually explicitly in the Gemara, but what's the case? The case is where you had the korban, it was brought properly, and then it became disqualified. So if it was good to begin with, so Laman Damar Kasher, this is Kasher, the sacrifice was great. But what happened? In the interim, before you ate it, because remember, you do it in the afternoon and then you eat it at night, it already became Tameh. So now it's Laman Damar Ro'el Achila, Hahashta Lavra Oil Achilahu. This can't be eaten. So according to Tanakama, what it has to do with is the korban kasher. Well, the korban was kasher, so that's fine. But according to the one who says it has to do with achila, Rebbe, you can't eat this, so it's not going to be a problem. Abaye Amar, no. Everyone will agree in this case. The korban was disqualified. It's true, you sacrificed it properly, but no, it's not going to have a problem with etzem lo tishbru. My time, hashtamiyat hapasulu. At this point, this sacrifice became disqualified. What Abaye says is that the whole question is, can you break the bone on your dalid? If you bring the day that you bring the korban with not the time when you're eating the korban. It's only a problem if you're eating it. Think about what we said. It's all about how you eat, right? You have to eat it, the Rambam, you have to eat it quickly, according to the Sefer Chinuch. You have to eat it like a mensch, that's what I think of my mother, right? Eat like a mensch, my mother would say. So don't eat like a pig, right? So it all has to do with when you eat. But if you want to break a bone on your dalid when no one's eating this, maybe that's okay. So now, how would you say that? So who falls where? Again, lemanda amal kasher hakasheru. It's a kosher korban, so of course you can't break the bone. Lemanda amal ro'ei la'achila. If it has to do with the food, so hashtalah barachilu. On the day of the 14th, can't eat it, so it's not ro'ei la'achila, so you wouldn't have a problem. Meitive, but they're going to ask a question on Abaye. We're actually going to answer this question, but we're going to bring a question. Rebbe Omer. Nimnim amoch shebarosh ve'ein nimnim amoch shebekulit. The marrow that's in the head of the animal, you can be part of a korban pesach and say that's the part I'm going to eat, but you can't do it on the marrow that's in this bone in the leg. So why? Amoch shebarosh my taima ho'il v'yachol garero ulahotzio. You can go through the nostrils and get to the head, so you can do that without breaking a bone. But isaka, so now. The moach shebekuli, no. So now they say like this. If you think that it's not forbidden to break the bone on your dalid, then what could you do? Kulit nami. You could join a korban pesach and say, listen, let's break the bone on your dalid when it's still allowed. And at nighttime, I'll take the marrow from there because I'll already have broken the bone before and it won't be a problem. So therefore, the fact that you can't join and say, I'm going to eat the marrow from the leg, from the bone in the leg, proves that this isn't true, that you can break it on your dalid. But Amar Lecha Abaye, he says, no, I can prove that you're wrong. According to you, who thinks that you can't break it on your dalid, I can give you a different reason why theoretically you should be able to eat the kulit. You can take a coal, put it on it, heat it up, and the marrow will seep out of there. You can get it without actually breaking it, so that can't really be the issue. And then you can join. It says in a Braita, it says there, if you burn the bones or cut the sinews, that's not a problem of shvirat ha'etzem. The main point here being not the sinews, but the issue of burning the bones. If you burn them and the marrow comes out, that's not breaking the bones. So elamait lach lamemar. So what can you say? So there has to be a different reason why you can't eat the kulit. So Abaye, you can't join the korban pesach and say, I'll take the marrow from the kulit. So Abaye amar mishum peka. Abaye's worry says the concern here is that if I put the coal on one spot, it might cause a break to happen in a different spot. And that's the issue. And Rava amar mishum hefseg kodshim. He says, we're worried that you're going to lose some of the sacrificial meat. Why? Tikamafsi lebiyadayim. Okay, what's the issue? So they're saying Dilma achel nura mimoach didei. What's the issue? We're worried that the fire will cause the moach, the marrow, to seep out and get lost. Okay, so the fire might cause a loss of sacrificial items. So there's this concern here, okay, that you're going to cause this loss. Okay, there's like a gzera here. What if, right, you do it in a way that's going to cause some other problem? So comes Abai and he explains, therefore, mi ba'od yom nami, we can say the same thing here. Gzera mi ba'od yom atu mishachashecha. We can say that we're not going to allow you to do it on your Daled. Why? Because, and that's what he's really trying to say is, just like I said before, that would be an nafkamina. Can you do it your Daled not? Because even though theoretically, okay, well, you can't eat this kuli for what reason? You really could do it, break the bone on your Daled. That's not the issue. The issue is that we don't want to allow you to do it. It's a gzera. In other words, mi'ikaradim, from the bottom of the letter of the law, you really could. But the issue here is that we're worried that you're going to, if we allow you to break bones on the 14th, you might mistakenly think that you could break bones on the 15th. Okay, so like these answers for the kulit, in other words, the kulit is an example of, it's really, you could eat the kulit, but we're going to make a gzera just in case, right? Mishum peka, something might burst somewhere else, right? The fire can cause a different part of the bone to break, or maybe some stuff will seep out and you'll cause a loss of the kudshim. But therefore, also here we're going to say gzera mi ba'od yom. Really, on the 14th, theoretically you could, because it's not ro'eh la'achila. You can't eat it then. But we're going to make a gzera. Just if we allow bone breaking on the 14th, you might think you could do bone breaking on the 15th. Another answer. Rav Papa, we're up to answer number 4. Rav Papa Amar, Kol ki agavne kule alma yesh bo mishum shvirat ha'etzem. No, everybody thinks it's a problem on the 14th from the Torah. Okay, we disagree, Abai. My timer, leorta mechze la'achila, and it's because it's good. What do you mean you can't eat it? It's true you can't eat it now, but you're going to be able to eat it tonight. It's not like it's not edible. So therefore, Ella, what's his theory? The debate is about a bone that if part of the limb went out of the area where it's allowed to be, okay, went out of Jerusalem, if part of the bone went out of Jerusalem and then it becomes pasul, so then we're going to have an issue. So manda amal kasher ha-kasherhu. Okay, now this is a little bit strange because what's the issue? The issue is, let's say I have this arm of the, okay, this part from here on goes out. So now I want to break the bone because I want to disconnect it because this is pasul and this is kasher. So he says, if you say it's kasher, well, it's right. What's the issue? So this is still kasher. So you can't break the bone because it's kasher, right? So manda amar ro'eh la'achila, ha'la barachilahu. But if you say it has to be ro'eh la'achila, now what happens? The assumption is, let's say this is the limb. This part went out. So I take off the meat and now I'm left with the bone. So can I cut the bone? Well, the bone is not something I'm going to eat anyway. It's just a bone. So that's not ro'eh la'achila. So theoretically, I should be able to break it. So if you say it's achila, then you can break it. If you say it has to do with kasher, well, this is kasher because again, you're cutting it at a place where it meets the kosher side. Kiditanya, as we see in the following praita, Rabbi Shmuel ben Osher Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer, Ever she'yatza miksato u'shvaro, ein bo mishum shvirat ha'etzem. So this would match Rebbe's opinion, who's going to be lenient here, who's going to say that since you can't eat it, so this is not an issue, right? There's no shvirat etzem. Next answer. Rav Shesha Braid, Rav Idi Amal, Kol ki agavna dekule alma ein bo mishum shvirat ha'etzem. Everybody thinks there's no shvirat etzem here. Why? Ta'ever ha'pasulu, because we're focusing on the part that became pasul. Of course, you could cut off that part because that part's disqualifying anyway. Ella, shvirat ha'etzem bina ika benayu. What are we worried about? If you want to break a bone of raw meat. Why? Manda amar kasher ha-kasheru. It's kosher korban. Manda amar ro'eh la'achila, hashteino ro'eh la'achila. Remember, you're not allowed to eat the korban pesach raw, so it's not, you can't eat it because you can't eat it raw. So therefore, there'd be no problem with shvirat etzem. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Amar, no. Kol ki agavna yesh bo mishum shvirat etzem. What do you mean? Of course it's a problem when it's raw. Because why? My time of dahachazi la'achila. Of course it can be eaten. What do you mean? Dimat ve'leva achile. You can roast it and then eat it. And it's raw meat is just potential to be cooked. So of course it's edible. Ela shvirata aliyah ikabenayu. The aliyah, the tail of the animal, of the sheep, would get burnt on the altar entirely. That we don't eat. So maybe that's what they're talking about. Maybe you could break a bone. So again, lemanda amal kasher hakashehu. This is part of a kosher korban. Of course you can't break the bone. Lemanda amal ro'oi lachila. But if you say it's all about whether you can eat it or not, haino ro'oi lachila. You can't eat that part. Da'alya legavoa salka, because it goes onto the altar up to God. Rav Ashi Amar, no, kol ki agavna v'dai ein bo mishum shvirat ha'etzem. This has no problem with shvirat etzem. Why? Tavadai no ro'oi lachila klal. This isn't even, the whole issue of etzem lo tishburo is the parts of the animal that you eat. This doesn't get eaten. Of course, it's not part of this forbidden thing. So that's not it. So what does he say? Ela ever she'en alav kazayat basar ikabenayu. It must be a limb that doesn't have a whole kazayat of meat on it. That's the question. Lemanda amar kasher hakasher. If you say it's kosher, right, that it's a sacrifice that's valid, is a valid sacrifice. Lemanda amar ro'ei lachila be'inan shiur achila v'leika. If it has to be something that you can eat, it has to have a requisite amount. If this doesn't have enough meat on it, it's not going to be a problem. Ravina amar. Kol ki agavna leip. We're getting near the end here. Kol ki agavna leipa mishum shvirat ha'etzem. Of course, you don't have a problem here. There's no shvirat ha'etzem. Dibi'inan shiur achila. Because of course, if it doesn't have kazayit, nobody's going to think it's a problem. It's only, it has to do with eating the shvirat ha'etzem. So if there's not a kazayit of meat, it's not a problem. Ela ever she'en alav kazayit basar b'makom zeh, v'yesh alav kazayit basar b'makom acher. It's a limb that has kazayit on one side, not kazayit on the other, and you want to break the side that doesn't have a kazayit of meat on it. Can you do that? So again, lemanda amar kasher. If you say it all has to do with a valid korban, this is kasher. Hakashehu. Lemanda amar ro'ei la'achila be'inan shiur achila b'mkom shvira v'haleka. You need to have achila where you're eating, and this doesn't have it. So there you have it. Your 8 possible differences between those two approaches of Tanakama and Rebbe. Whether we say it's all, is it disqualified? Only if it's disqualified, you're not going to have a problem of etzem lo tishburo, versus Rebbe, who says even if it's disqualified, but, or even if it's kosher, but there's some other issue, which is you can't eat it, and then the question is, what is that? What does that include? Then you're also not going to have a problem of lo tishburo. Now we're going to bring a braita. Tanya ka'arba'a minayu. There's a braita that goes like 4 of them, really goes like 5, but they're viewing Rav Ashi and Ravina, who talked about the shiur of a kazayit as one approach. Okay, so this braita says a bunch of things, and we're going to prove like 4 answers. Titanya, Rebbe Yomi. Okay, the braita is quoting Rebbe here, but bayat achad yachel. So far, it's like we said. Ve'etzem lo tishburo bo. Al hakasher eno chayav. Al hakasher o chayav ve'eno chayav al pasul. So number 1, this must be where they got it from in the beginning. That Rebbe also holds like Tanakama, that it has to be kasher. Haytalo shata kosher v'nifsal b'shat achila. If it was a valid korban and then became pasul when it came time to eat, that was one of the first ones we saw. That was Rav Yosef, the second answer we saw. Ein bo mishum shvirat ha'etzem, but yesh bo shiur achila, yesh bo mishum shvirat ha'etzem. Right? He said if it had shak kosher and then became disqualified, then it's not going to be a problem. I read a little too far, so again, let me go back. Ala kasher chayav, but not ala pasul. But you won't be chayav also if it was okay and then became pasul. Then also there's no shvirat ha'etzem. Yesh bo shiur achila, yesh bo mishum shvirat ha'etzem. If it has a kezayit. Ein bo shiur achila, ein bo mishum shvirat etzem. This is like Rav Ashi and Ravina, who talked about the shiur achila. Hara'oi lamizbeach, ein bo mishum shvirat etzem. This is the one about the aliyah, about the tail. If it goes on the mizbeach, then it doesn't have shvirat etzem because you're not eating it. B'shat achila yesh bo mishum shvirat etzem. Ve'shalo b'shat achila ein bo mishum shvirat etzem. This was the one about your dalit. If you're doing it on the day, this was Abaye, the third answer. Doing it during the day, it's not going to have a problem. It's not a problem. But if you're doing it at night, then it will be a problem. Okay, last part for today, Itmar. Now we're going to see, similarly, a machloka between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Ever she'en alav kazayit basar b'makom zeh. This is like one of the reasons we saw of Rav Ashi. I think it was Rav Ashi. No, sorry, Ravina. an aver that doesn't have kazayit basar b'makom zeh in one spot, but yesh alav kazayit basar b'makom acher, but it does somewhere else, right, on the same limb, but not where I'm breaking the bone. Rabbi Yochanan amar yesh bo mishum shvirat ha'etzem. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish amar ein bo mishum shvirat ha'etzem. So Rabbi Yochanan says it's a problem. Rish Lakish says it's not a problem. Eitiv Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan now raises a question against Rish Lakish and says, "Ve'etzem lo tishberu bo." What do we learn from here in this braita? Echad etzem sheyesh alav kazayit basar, ve'echad etzem she'en alav kazayit basar. Right? Whether it has a kazayit or whether it doesn't have a kazayit. So my ein alav kazayit basar. What do we mean by it has a kazayit, doesn't have a kazayit of meat? If there's no kazayit on it at all, why would you even think to tell us? Right? It says here, right? It actually says, even if it has kazayit or it doesn't have kazayit, you're going to be obligated. So they say, what are you talking about? Etzem l'tish berubo is an issue with the meat. If you don't have a kazayit of meat, of course it's not a problem. Elav hachi kamar. It must mean, it must be talking about our case. Etzem echad sheyesh alav kazayit basar b'makom zeh, ve'echad she'en alav kazayit basar b'makom zeh, ve'yesh alav kazayit basar b'makom acher. So he says to Rish Lakish, this must be talking about our case, the thing we're arguing about, which is, it does. What does it mean it doesn't have kazayit of meat? Of course it has to have kazayit of meat for you to be obligated in etzem lo tishberu bo about breaking the bone. So it must be it has kazayit of meat in one spot, but you want to break it in a different spot. And what does it say? You're going to be obligated anyway. So that matches my opinion. Rabbi Yochanan says, and it doesn't match yours, Rish Lakish. I'm going to have to leave you suspended. We'll see the answer in Sunday's shiur. Have a Shabbat Shalom or Shavua Tov to everyone.